We have a plethora of Aggravate DPSs in Genshin Impact, and Clorinde has now joined these ranks. But why are Aggravate Electros the only kind that Hoyo wants to produce? At what point does the market of Aggravate units become oversaturated? Whatever types of potential do these units have? I'm going to answer all that and more within today's video. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. To be fair, Electro wasn't really anything special pre 3.0. It was among one of the worst elements, with characters like Raiden Shogun reigning eternal over the 2.x era's meta. Fischl and Beidou also had a place, and Electro Charged was all the craze when it came to 4-star teams. Damn, that was all a while ago. And listen, despite Clorinde in modern day being Aggravate, I'd be lying if I was saying I wasn't into her, because Clorinde is really fine, and I'd be lying if I was saying I wasn't ready to welcome her with open arms. But if I want Clorinde, I'm gonna need Genesis crystals. Where can I go to afford these better? That's where Loot Bar comes in. Loot Bar is a fantastic service which cuts the cost of Primogems and Stellar Jades compared to the original prices as shown in-game. With 5% off for new users, it saves up to 20% compared to the official channel. Loot Bar is very safe and has received a lot of good reviews. Is this legit? How do they do this? Well, allow me to demonstrate. You need no login information whatsoever, just your UID. Go ahead and input that after choosing your desired package. Pay safely, and then voila. Take a look at this price comparison between the official cost and the Loot Bar cost. This is perfectly legitimate as the site uses a VPN to provide you for cheaper Primogems and official top-up methods are used. Try out Loot Bar today to save on all your gacha needs. Characters like Keqing were historically clowned on for just having no purpose. Getting a Keqing used to be 10 times more heartbreaking than it is now. Well, it still is, since she's preventing you from getting your target waifu, but you get the idea. Part of this was because Keqing's whole deal is that she applies Electro super quickly, but there was no purpose for this pre-Aggravate, and her numbers weren't good enough to justify using her. People even coped hard with physical Keqing. Like, that used to be an actual debate once, whether you should use Electro or physical. When you're so bricked that physical becomes on par with your regular kit, you know it's over. Nobody would even dream of doing this anymore. Yae Miko was super hyped up until release due to A, being hot, and B, being prominent in the story. Then she came out, and she was literally worse than a C6 Kujo Sara in Raiden Hyper. Yikes. And she took up way too much field time to justify using her anywhere. Much like Ayato in current day, she was literally a side grade everywhere you put her. That's not to mention the kit bugs and targeting issues she had on release as well, but I'm mostly focusing on her element here. Then Dendro came along and entirely fixed these units. Keqing's Electro application finally had something useful about it. More Electro equals more Fischl A4s equals more Aggravates. She became a great Fischl driver and shot up to not only be one of the most competent Aggravate units, but one of the most free to play, since later on, units like Kirara would act as a good Dendro 4-star option. And Yae Miko, while she still felt clunky to play ultimately, she actually did damage now. She went from a sub DPS to being worth playing as her own main DPS in Aggravate teams with supports that can cover for her flaws. Playing her as a DPS made her long field time less egregious, especially with the short swappable nature of characters like Fischl or Nahida, so she became worth playing. Fischl also went from being a really good sub DPS to having an undisputed best in slot place within the Aggravate archetype. If you're playing aggro, you're most definitely playing Fischl 90% of the time, the other 10% being hyper carry copers. Well, it is less cope if you're playing Clorinde. Not to mention how units such as Lisa, a free-to-play friendly character who just randomly had EM scaling for no apparent reason, was obviously designed with future mechanics in mind, even if Dendro was not fully completed at this stage. Dendro is cheap to use, so it makes sense. So, Aggravate fixed a lot of old Electro units. Why would Hoyo not want to push as many as humanly possible? Clearly they're well received. Well, after a while, all these kits start to blend together. Back in my day, Electro characters used to be creative. Raiden Shogun's whole deal was being a Duracell battery who could also dish out numbers, while also buffing burst damage based on burst cost with her E. Fischl is a mini machine gun who can transform into a bird. Beidou had a full counter strike, and yeah, those Electros were the only free who counted back then, let's be honest. I think it's a shame that Hoyo just refuses to get more creative with kits. only following the norm. It irks me because I know that Hoyoverse literally always has creative kits in their backlog. Let's detour from Electro just for a minute to visit the current worst element, Geo. I have a point with this, so stay with me. Why they even decided to have an innate reaction in a game about reactions in the first place is beyond me. But anyways, Chiori, a Geo sub-DPS. She has some interesting ideas present in her kit. She utilizes your party setup, and you can even choose to on-field her for a bit. But why were we given an Albedo too? We didn't need an upgrade to him. We needed a Geo buffer for Navia, who doesn't really have any tailor-made supports. I guess you could argue Chiori is that support, but why have a character with mono Geo qualities, needing constructs, to be paired with the constructless Geo unit who breaks the element's norms? For the better, quite frankly. Okay, so what was my point with that? That this stagnation of creativity also extends to other units in general. There is a wider issue of Hoyoverse's creativity at hand, and not only that, but their will to actually give us strong characters. There was such an obvious route to take for Chiori that they ignored. So this leads me to believe that Hoyoverse is perfectly aware that they're only pumping out Aggravate after Aggravate Electro, and they just don't do anything about it, because it's safe. It gets boring. Most Dendro archetypes have a ton of different options to use. I personally don't even find Nilu that restrictive because of the sheer number of Hydros and Dendros you can use with her. But with aggro, it's always Fischl, Dendro, Animo. The units produced will always be satisfactory. Not too broken, not too weak either. Just fine. And Hoyo knows that. They don't want to possibly risk detouring from the norm and then having a unit that's way too under or overtuned. So, when does the market of aggravate-focused units become oversaturated? Already feels that way, honestly. You may think, Imaginarium Theater, Juice. Okay, but think of it like this. You can't use Fischl, Nihida, and Kazuha for more than 2 straight runs of Imaginarium in a row. You can replace Nihida and Kazu, but replacing Fischl kinda ruins them. Unless you're playing Clorinde, then there's Yunjin. I'd say it becomes oversaturated when all the units start to blend in and do the same thing in different coats of paint. Hu Tao and Linny are both single-target pyro DPSs, but they do it in a very different way, and have their own separate strengths within their niches. Or if we even throw Arlecchino into the mix, she has better AoE than Linny, but worse single target, while being a lot more adaptable. Whereas Linny is a nuke and single target, and if you have the right amount of skill, he's a literal menace against bosses. And while Hu Tao is weaker than both, she can deal on plunging playstyles and still be very strong. Notice how all 3 of these pyro DPS units have their own thing going for them, despite all filling the same core pyro DPS role. Now, the pros of Clorinde, Yae, and Keqing. All 3 are decent across AoE and single target, have good energy economies thanks to Fischl, enjoy damage bonus percent, and are very fast-paced teams. I do think that Clorinde is the best of the bunch thanks to your high damage and self-sustain, but literally the only thing that made Clorinde different is that they looked at Aggravate's shortcomings and decided to fix them on Clorinde. Shorter field time than Yae, a lot more damage than Keqing, and self-sustain so you don't have to debate between damage or comfort with Nihida or Baiju, or even Karara. What's worse is my boy Sethos. This guy literally sucks, and while Hoyo tried to get experimental with him, he's still an Aggravate DPS, with cons that don't really fix him. Why did they make the Aggravate 4-star compete with the highly anticipated and much stronger Aggravate 5-star on the same banner? Making Sethos do, I dunno, literally anything else would have given him his own identity and niche. Additionally, a reason to play him, even if his damage still sucked. But no, he had to be Aggravate, for some reason. If these units dealt in aggro, but all had different things to do within aggro, it'd be different. What if one of them wanted Cookie more over Fischl? What if Lynette was strictly best in slot for one of them? What if their playstyle was more focused on hypercarry buffing and Kujo Sara would be the best choice? To be fair, Clorinde works really well with Sara, so credit where credit is due, she is the most unique of this bunch. But ideally, Hoyoverse would start tapping in on Electro's untouched potential. Where is Electro Untapped, you may ask? Electrocharged, Overload, hear me out on that one, Superconduct, and Mono Electro. Let's do this sequentially. When it comes to Electrocharged, it used to be a really good comp back in the day for 4-star characters. Anyone remember the famous Beidou Fischl Xingqiu Sucrose dynasty? I do. It was a great AoE team archetype that fell off hard due to Hyperbloom's rise. Hyperbloom did everything Electrocharge did, but for a lot cheaper, and quite frankly put the team out of business. So why have we not gotten an Electro character that specializes in Electrocharged? Why could Clorinde not have been that unit? We have tons of Hydro and Animal units to choose from to build varying rosters of Electrocharged teams. Then, Overload. Okay, Hoyoverse is in the game. Yes, it got the attention it needed, and it's a working team now. It just sucks that Hoyoverse refuses to release an Electro whose main deal is all about it. Right now, Hoyoverse is just an insane ride and hyper buff, and pretty good for pyro DPSs who can use Overload. Clorinde uses Overload, but my issue is that not only was she not designed around it, but it's her weakest team. Overload can clear, yeah, in like 1 minute and 20 seconds. You use Overload either because no other units are available, or because it's your cheapest team to get going off the ground, or because you like running 2 policewomen. That last reason is the most valid. We need a damn Electro who is all about Overload. Superconduct is neglected. Very neglected. It's more of a catalyst for physical DPS units, yeah, but why not have an Electro who deals in both electro and physical damage at the same time? Juice, that sounds awful. Yes, it sounds terrible because Hoyoverse hasn't had the guts to actually try and make an interesting and strong kit based on the concept. They sorta tried with Fremine and Shatter, but were too afraid to make him, well, any good. And then Mono Electro. An Electro Linny would honestly be really cool. 0 ER for days, thanks to Particle Gen. And consider how Mono Electro is never worth running. They could so easily make a fun kit based on wanting Mono Electro, but they just don't. Because adding any kind of Dendro or Hydro to your Electro teams always makes them do more DPS. It is such an obvious avenue for them to take. If they want to shift the Aggravate formula even, why not try a Nilou variant? As in, only Electros and Dendros allowed, no Animos. They produce something cool like, I don't know, galvanizing fruits. Some kind of alternative to Bloom Bountiful Cores. Clorinde could have broken into any of these archetypes. Instead, she just acted as Yae power creep. To put it into perspective, we have Clorinde, Yae, and Keqing. Now, with Geo, imagine we had Chiori, Albedo, and then for whatever reason, Hoyo looked at all of Chiori's potential flaws and decided, yeah, let's do this again, but better. For being the premier 5-star Electro release of the Fontaine patch, it's disappointing. Listen, I love Clorinde. When it came to pulling her, I don't really mind that her kit design is absolutely generic, as her striking playstyle and gorgeous looks more than make up for it. But she isn't helping the issue. It made all the sense in the world for the gun lady to be Overload focused, just in my opinion, but she wasn't. Electros on the whole are always relegated to Dendro nowadays. Hyper Bloom Raiden, Quick Bloom Sino, Hyper Bloom Cookie Shinobu. Think, Hoyoverse, think! With so many kit designers at your HQ, I doubt that Aggravate was the only Clorinde option. Thankfully, with high enough investment, Clorinde, Kujo, Sara, Yunjin, Kazuha does become a very competent hyper team, which is Dendro free, plus also introduces a new use case for Yunjin that is very refreshing. And that's another thing. If we're gonna keep pumping out aggro after aggro, breathe some new life into older units that need the second chance. Like, come on man, give Razor a go again. Also, all of these 5 stars are quick swap DPSs. Why not a sub DPS, or a new Animo who works specifically for Aggravate? If you want to hone in on this team so much, Hoyo, then at least create some kind of Shenhe for it. You could honestly justify it with the amount of Aggravate characters there are now. It wouldn't even be that niche of a support. Now, time for my verdict. Let me pass my testimony to the Oratrice Mécanique d'Annelise Cardinal, and it'll deliver us the objective truth as to whether Hoyo is chickening out on giving us more interesting Electro kits due to playing it way too safe. And what do you know? The answer is yes. How can we fix this? Well, the answer is obvious, no? Make some experimental 4 stars that do these things. Not bad ones, decent ones. 4 stars that people can actually get excited for the way that we were excited for gaming. Then gauge the reception on these characters. And when they turn out to be good, oh, because I don't know, you actually made a good character kit for them, Hoyo. Try out a 5-star of this nature. Listen, I do love the big 3 aggro units, especially Yae and Clorinde, and despite my clowning on him, I think Sethos is pretty cool. But it's a shame that all these units need to fight for exactly the same role, as if there is no other way to sell Electro units in Hoyo's minds. Get creative, go wild, do what you did with Navia even. Break Electro's conventions, and in turn, we'll all be left with a lot more to look forward to and can actually feel hyped about new, unique flavors of character kits. I love chocolate as much as the next guy, but chocolate every day is a pure no-go for me. Hopefully this video was able to get you critically thinking about how stagnant Hoyo's current Electro releases are, and how Hoyo could approach these releases in a more different and exciting way. Just do it, Hoyoverse! This has been Juice, signing out. I remember that for every new Aggravate that Hoyoverse releases, Fischl's governmental power increases. Immer Aggravate Reich.